Hey guys, Zach here. In this video, I'm going to be going over some concepts like GitOps and containerization. I really want to show you guys how these principles, approaches can help with the automation and deployment of application architecture at the edge. We're going to go over some topics, and then I'm actually going to get into a step-by-step demo where I actually show you guys how to implement some of these concepts in a tool that I like to use called Portainer. Let's go ahead and get into it. So let's start with the demand. And the reality is, the demand has been growing for edge compute over the last few years. And it's not just because of AI and ML, even though these are major contributors and drivers right now. It's really part of a bigger picture. And that bigger picture is really digital maturity for all of our factories. Every day, we're starting to see more and more industrial applications being deployed and utilized across manufacturing floors. Anything from real-time data analytics to visualizations to autonomous vehicles. All these applications are transforming the way our factories operate and innovate, and they're really driving the needs for compute for our industrial environments. But just with any new technology or innovation, we're always going to have a new set of challenges. And with deploying applications to edge environments, some of the things that I've been trying to figure out with my job are things like, how do we automate the deployment to all these environments across an enterprise? And then once they're deployed, how do we manage them so that we can make sure that they're up to date or we can scale them at different rates? I know these are things that I've been really trying to figure out on my own. And I know a lot of you have been trying to figure it out as well. And I know as I've been going through and trying to figure out, what are some different design patterns for how we can address this, I think this is an example where manufacturing can look at traditional software development and deployment and figure out, are there things that we can learn? And I think in this case, we can. I think DevOps and the principle of GitOps and containerization is really something that manufacturing can benefit from when talking about deploying and managing these applications at the edge at scale. So I know a lot of you are probably saying, Zach, what the heck is GitOps? I've never heard of that in my entire life. So maybe let's start there. So the whole idea around GitOps is really started with infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is where some really smart people figured out, hey, we could automate the deployment of all of our infrastructure, and we could do that by defining some type of configuration file, and then using that configuration file in our automation scripts to do the automation of the deployments. And this was a really cool, infrastructure as code was really, really cool, but they figured out, hey, we have all these configuration files local on our machine, and when other people need to stand up these environments, it's kind of hard to know what configuration file they have and to be able to share the configuration file. So this is where GitOps really came into play. So GitOps is the idea of doing infrastructure as code, but checking in that configuration file into a Git repository. And the reason we would want to do that is once we have that configuration file in a Git repo, now we have version control, so we can see exactly what's changed or what's been deleted. We can also integrate that with our peer review process or other CI/CD pipelines. And once the Git, the main branch sees a Git commit or a merge, now we can trigger other pipelines to automate the deployment. So that's what the whole idea of what GitOps is. So let's maybe walk through how this would work for our edge case and kind of what we're going to do in the demo. So what you're seeing on screen now is kind of a generic setup that you would see at most manufacturing sites. You're going to have some type of enterprise layer where typically this is an EDC or maybe even the cloud. And typically you're going to have most of your applications deployed here. These are typically some type of high trust network that you can remote into and stand up infrastructure as needed. In the bottom, you can see these are our edge environments. We only have 2 for this demo. But you would imagine for an enterprise, you could have many, many of these different edge environments that you all need to be able to deploy and manage application stacks at. So for this demo, again, we're showing GitOps, so how we can define a standard configuration and then deploy them to all of our environments and also update those environments. For this to work with Portainer, there's really 2 components. There is the Portainer server, which sits in that enterprise or high trust environment. And then you have your edge agents all on the edge compute at each edge environment. So one of the main components that we need and that we're going to show in this demo is really that configuration file. In this demo, it's going to be a Docker Compose file. This file really is the configuration definition for what applications are in our stack that we're going to deploy to all of our edge environments. So for this, we're using 3 different services. This could be kind of a representative architecture for most edge environments. We're going to use Intelligence Hub for data ops. So modeling that data, to structure that data, to be able to integrate all of our consuming nodes. InfluxDB as an historian. Most edge environments are going to have some type of historian so that you can leverage store and forward. And then we also have Ignition, which is a SCADA platform, visualizations, being able to do some quick scripting or analytics on that data at the edge. So this is going to represent the demo architecture that we're going to deploy to all the edge. But again, the main component that we're looking at here is that configuration file that defines what services that we're going to deploy as part of the stack. Another component that the demo uses is what's called a registry or a container image repository. So all the applications that we deploy to, Portainer is going to build all of our containers for us and deploy them, but it has to know how to create the container. That's what a container image is. And when Portainer goes to create that image, it needs to know where that image is at and how to get to that image so that it can build the container. So we're going to have a registry for all of our images. We're going to use Docker Hub, which is a public registry. Portainer does have the option to be able to define private self-hosted registries. That way, if you don't want to use something public, you could set something on your internal environment and use that for all your images. But essentially how this works, again, you have the registry, you have that configuration file, and you have these Portainer server and the edge agents. So essentially how this is going to work is we're going to take our configuration file and we're going to find the three services that we use. So Intelligence Hub, InfluxDB, and Ignition. We're then going to push that configuration file to the Git repository, and we're going to commit to the main branch. So when we do that, we're pushing our changes to the main or the top level branch of our Git repository. Portainer is going to be listening to this Git repository to see if changes are made. As soon as we push this change, Portainer is going to say, hey, there's a new branch for main or a new configuration file that I need to go ahead and rebuild the entire architecture and redeploy everything. So Portainer is going to pull in that configuration file defined in our repo, in our Git repo. It's going to go ahead and build the containers, but it needs to know where those images are. So it's going to pull in our Docker images from the container registry and go ahead and build those containers. And then it's going to go ahead and build the configuration. So at this point, this is pretty typical for most orchestration, right? One of the things that is really unique to edge environments is really these edge environments are what's called a low trust environment. So they typically have very stringent security controls. It's really hard to just remote into these environments if your InfoSec will even let you do that. So we need something deployed at the edge that is reaching up into our high trust environment to see, hey, is there a new configuration for me? So that's why the edge agent comes into play. The edge agents at all of our edge compute nodes, they will periodically poll the Portainer server to see, hey, is there a new configuration for me? And if so, it'll go ahead and do a reverse tunnel and pull in that new configuration and automatically deploy it. So every so often, the edge agents are pulling the Portainer server. After we've pushed a Git and it's the Portainer server has rebuilt something, the edge agents will say, hey, there's a new configuration for me. It's ready to go. It'll do that reverse tunnel. And then Portainer will deploy all of those applications as containers to each edge environment for all the edge environments that we have it configured to at the same time. So for this, you can see both of these edge environments will receive the configuration and will have the same architecture running at every edge environment, which is really powerful, right? We're able to automate the creation of the containers, the deployment of the containers, and it's all done via source control configuration files that we have in our Git repository. So that's really the power of GitOps. That's how this demo works. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're actually going to get started with the actual demo. All right, guys, what you can see now is I'm remoted into the management server, which is similar to what you would have deployed in an enterprise data center or some type of high trust environment. Before we get into actual use of Portainer and setting up the demo, let's go through the configuration that I have. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see there's 3 different devices that we've established a connection to. The first on the bottom left is the management server. That's what I'm showing you guys right now. This is where we're going to install Portainer server at, and essentially what's going to do the orchestration of our containers and do the building of our containers and deploying them to the edge. Then we also have Edge 1 and Edge 2. These are the edge compute nodes at two different manufacturing areas, manufacturing area 1 and manufacturing area 2. All of these devices are running on Linux. Just kind of be aware of that. So before we get started, there's a few things that you're going to want to set up in your environment. So the very first thing is we're going to use Git to do, again, that GitOps. So you need to have Git installed and have a public repo that can be reachable from Portainer. We're going to be using GitHub for this example, but you could set up your own private repository as long as that Portainer can reach that. The second thing is we need to have Docker installed on all of our devices. Portainer is going to be using and creating containers. So we need to make sure we just have Docker on all of the machines. I'm not going to go through and tell you guys how to install Docker on Linux. There's a million guides on Google. Just go through and find one that you like and go ahead and set it up. Once you've installed Docker, you want to just do a quick check to make sure it's running okay. So we're just going to show you guys how to do that. Essentially, you're just going to pull up a terminal, and then you're going to run the Docker version command. And there's really two things that you want to check for. One is that the client or the Docker engine is running, and the second is that the server Docker engine is running. You need both the client and the server. But you just want to make sure that you have that installed on all three of your devices or all your devices, both the management server and all your edge devices. So that is how basically Docker, and then you need to make sure you have Git. And then the last thing is you need to install Portainer. Again, I'm not going to show you how to install Portainer. Just go to their website, portainer.io, look at the documentation, and then look for the install for the Docker standalone Linux install procedure. I followed it. There was really no issues. I didn't hit any kind of weird quirks with the documentation. It's really, really good. But just go ahead and follow that. And then when you're ready and you have all the dependencies installed into your environments, you're going to get to where we're going to start the actual demo. So I'm going to go ahead and get in my management server and pull up a web browser. I'm also going to launch the terminal. So it's probably just good practice after you install Portainer to make sure that it is installed correctly, is just run your Docker PS command. This is going to give you a list of all your running processes in Docker. So essentially, when Portainer is installed correctly, you should see a container running called Portainer, and it should list all the ports that Portainer is using. So Portainer's web GUI uses API. It's using the port 9443. So now that I know that it's running, I'm going to go to 127.0.0.1, which is my loopback address, and type in 9444.3. And Firefox is getting mad at me because it is an HTTPS web GUI. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit accept, risk, and continue. And I'm going to get presented with this screen. So this is the login screen. If this is the first time you're logging into Portainer, you're going to get prompted to create an account. I've already created an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and sign in. So really, Portainer, this is the web GUI. There's really two main areas. There's the left navigation bar on the left-hand side, and then there's the main content area. You can see right now I have Portainer is running. It's listed as management server. I think the first time you install it's called LAN or local or something like that. I just renamed it just so it's a little bit more obvious what's my management versus all my edge environments. So the first thing that we want to see is on the left-hand side, you might not see this edge compute, these options for edge compute. So what you're going to do is go to settings and then edge compute. And by default, I think these are checked off. You want to check both enable edge compute features and enforce use of Portainer generated edge IDs. You also just want to make sure that the URLs here match. So again, the API uses port 9443, and the reverse tunnel, or the port that the edge agents will be reaching out to the management server, is 8000. So we just want to make sure that those ports are the ports that we're using and they're available and they're open to use. And then we just need to make sure that the IP matches the device that Portainer is running on. So my management server is running on .159. That's the device ID. And so I know that works. So at this point, we're kind of ready to actually start setting up the demo. So the very first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to set up Portainer to dynamically onboard our devices and establish them with a group. So you can set up manually, but we just want to make it so that as soon as the device is powered on, it gets associated and I don't have to go in there and configure it. So the way we do that is create tags. Tags are essentially some type of identity that Portainer uses to associate different devices with different groups. So we're going to create tags that represent manufacturing area 1 and manufacturing area 2. And the idea is we'll have a edge group that is subscribed to these tags. So as a device with a tag comes online, it automatically gets associated with that group. So to do this, you're going to go to environments, click on tags, and then we're going to create a tag. So I'm just going to call this Zach's demo site. So you can have some type of semantic hierarchy here or however you want to do it. I'm just going to do site and then area. So manufacturing area 1. And then Zach's demo site area manufacturing 2. And create tag. So now I have my 2 tags. They represent 2 different manufacturing areas. So now I'm ready to create an edge group. So again, what an edge group is a logical grouping that eventually application stacks will be assigned to. So an application stack is just our collection of applications that we want to deploy as a set configuration. We assign those stacks to a group, and then groups are composed of different devices that are assigned to it. So we're going to go ahead and create this edge group. So I'm just going to call it, this would probably be like a site name or how all of your edge devices fit under. So I'm just going to call that the Zach's edge group, or let's just call it Zach's site. And we're going to set it to be dynamic. Again, I don't want to have to set all these devices and manually associate them with the environment. I want it to automatically get associated based off of the tags that we've created in the last. So then I'm going to create partial match. Full match is where they have to match all the tags that are listed for this environment. I just want, basically we have 2 tags, manufacturing area 1, manufacturing area 2. If a device has a tag manufacturing area 1, I want to throw it in here. If a device has manufacturing 2, I want to throw it in here, right? I don't want them to have both tags. So here I'm just going to select the tags. So now I've added the 2 tags. I said a device that gets associated with this group only needs to have 1 of those tags, and we've called it Zach's site. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit add edge group. And at this point, I have my group. You can see there's no devices associated with this group because, again, I haven't created my edge agent. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and create the edge agents and then install that onto the edge agents so that they'll automatically get associated. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and go down to environments and then auto onboarding. And this is where I'm going to set up the edge agent to be able to essentially, this is going to install a script, then is going to run on my edge agent. And this is what's going to enable us to do the auto onboarding. So some of these things you just leave blank. We're going to select edge agent standard. You'd use async if you were using your edge was deployed on some type of like cellular network or something that was a little bit less reliable. Most of the time, you're just going to want to do the standard. For group, we can just leave that blank because, again, we're going to leave this essentially, it's going to get auto associated based off the tag. So we have to tell it what tag we're doing. And we're using edge 1 first. So we're going to select manufacturing 1 tag, which is the tag that associates us with that area. For the next thing is we need to set this Portainer edge ID. So we're just going to come here and set that. And then we're going to say manufacturing 1 edge 1. So essentially, because our tag is for a specific area, we could have multiple compute nodes in a specific area. So I like to give it an ID that is kind of associates the manufacturing area with the device. So that's why I gave it this, essentially this name. Now we just click on Linux, and then we click on Docker standalone. And this is going to give us our script down here, essentially for what we need to run on our edge device. So I'm going to go ahead and click copy, and we're going to go over to edge 1. So first, I need to set the environment variable for Portainer edge ID. So to do that, I'm just going to type in export Portainer edge ID, and then we'll set it to what we set it in Portainer, which is manufacturing 1 underscore edge underscore 1. That looks like it's set correctly. So let's just go ahead and do an echo Portainer edge ID, and I forgot the. Okay, so it's set to manufacturing underscore 1 underscore edge underscore 1. So I know my environment variable is set correctly. So now we're going to go ahead and run that script that we copied from Portainer. So now it's going to go ahead and build the Portainer edge agent for us. And it looks like it's complete. So just to double check that this installed correctly, we're going to go to sudo docker ps or process show. And we can see that we now have the Portainer agent running. It's 2.19.5 and it's been running for 12 seconds. So that looks good. So now we're going to go back to the management server and we need to do the same thing, but for Edge 2 now. So I'm going to select the Edge 2 tag, and then we're going to change this to manufacturing _2 _ Edge 1. And then we are going to copy this and then do the same thing. We're going to remote in. Again, we need to set the environment variable. So we're going to do export Portainer edge ID equals, and this one's _2 _1. And then again, echo just to double check. And then I did the same thing twice. I need there we go. Okay, so that looks correct. So we're just going to go ahead and hit paste. And I do need to run this with elevated permissions. So again, it's going to go ahead and build the Edge agent for Edge 2. So we'll just let that build for just 1 second. And then once that's done complete, again, I want to do a Docker process show. And again, I can see that I now have Portainer running. And it's been up for 4 seconds. So now I have the Portainer Edge agents running on both Edge 1 and Edge 2, and they're tagged correctly. So the next thing is to see if Portainer is seeing those devices. So normally you would ship these devices to the, you ship them to your enterprise team. They would install Portainer Edge agent onto them, and then they would power them down and they would ship them to the site and allow them to install them and then turn them on. Normally you would have some time between when you ship them and when they're turned on. So you can imagine, at this point, we might not have these for, a few weeks. But as soon as the site turns them on, installs them and turns them on, I will see them in Portainer. So let's go ahead and look at that right now. So if I go back to my Portainer Edge management server, I'm going to go to waiting room, and looky there. I have my manufacturing Edge 1 and my manufacturing Air 2, and they last checked in a few seconds ago. So again, because those virtual machines were already running, they pretty much showed up immediately. But you can imagine, again, these will be in the site. As soon as they get powered on, I'm going to see them in this page right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all of them. And the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and, they're in a waiting room right now. So we need to go ahead and acknowledge that these are devices that we recognize and to go ahead and associate them. So I'm going to click on associate device. And now they're no longer in the waiting room. You can see that it's a success. So if I go back to my Edge groups, I should now be able to see those devices because, again, that group is set to assign for those tags. So you can imagine maybe those devices had different tags that were assigned for different groups. Their device is always going to go to the correct group based on how you've configured it. I only have one group configured. So now you can see I have 2 different environments set up for this group. So I click there. You can see here's manufacturing _ Edge 1 and manufacturing 2. So both of those devices are there. If I go to Edge stack, you can see that there's no stack defined. So if I were to remote into here, again, if I run a Docker process show, I don't have any applications running here yet, right? So I need to go ahead and set up the application stack, define the configuration file so that we can set up the GitOps. And then as soon as that's done, we're going to have these applications automatically deployed to our Edge environments that we've just set up. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, I'm going to go to Edge stacks, and you can see there's nothing here right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click add stack. So the first thing is I need to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this demo Edge stack. And again, a stack, all that is a collection of applications or services that we plan to deploy to our different environments. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to associate this stack with this group. So if you have many groups, you could tell it, only one group or whatever combination of groups. Basically, this is just what groups are going to get this stack. Next, we're using Docker Compose. We're not using like Kubernetes or anything like that. The web editor. So this is normally where you would define the configuration file and you would just manually configure it here. And this is all you technically need to automate the deployment. That being said, we want to use GitOps and configuration manage that configuration file. So we're going to actually select repository here. And you can see there's a few settings here that we need to set. So the first is the repository URL. So this is the address for the Git repo that should be reachable by Portainer. We have ours on GitHub, but you could do something like a private repo. As long as it's reachable from Portainer, that is totally fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get the URL for my the repository I have set up for this. So I'm going to say view on GitHub. That's going to pull up a browser. I'm going to grab this URL, and then we're going to paste that into here. One thing to note is on this Git repo, the main branch is called main. It's not called master. So that's kind of important for this next one. This next one is asking us, where do we point in the repo? So I'm going to tell it, hey, I wanted to use main, which is our top level here. And the next is the path to the composer file, or that configuration file that tells Portainer what the configuration is. So to get that, I'm just going to pull up my repo. I'm going to show file, and you can see I have this Docker compose file, and it's just sitting in the base directory. So I can just list docker compose.yaml there, which is just the default file name. So you might be asking, what is that YAML file and what does it look like? So let me go ahead and show it to you guys real quick. Again, Docker uses Docker compose, where you can kind of define different configurations and what is in this image. So unless you know Docker compose, this might look a little bit, you might not have seen this before, and that's totally fine. I would encourage you guys, go read about Docker compose. It's actually really straightforward, but essentially it allows us to define that configuration for all the containers that we need to build. So here you can see there's really two services that I am building. That is HiByte and InfluxDB. So for this first iteration, I'm going to create, we're only going to deploy HiByte and InfluxDB. These are the ports for those services that these applications use. And then we have volumes. For some of those of you that don't know what volumes are or are new to Docker, Docker doesn't persist data. As soon as you close down a Docker image or a Docker container, all the data that was generated during that session is going to be lost. You have to set up a volume, which is data persistence for the Docker container. That way, when you shut the Docker container, then turn it back on, all your data is still there. So these are the locations or how we have those volumes mapped, so we know where that data from these applications is going to be stored. So this is all I need here. But this is what a Docker compose file is. And after we deploy this, Intelligence Hub and InfluxDB stack initially, we're actually going to come make an update to this, and you guys are going to see how the GitOps works within Portainer. So that's actually the next setting I need to set up when we're setting up this stack is the GitOps updates. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. And essentially this is telling Portainer to listen to that repo so that if changes happen, to go ahead and rebuild the configuration and then redeploy it. So it's basically how to set up GitOps, essentially, which is exactly what it sounds like. When you're setting up GitOps, you can either do it by polling or by webhook. We're just going to keep it by polling. We're going to change it to 1 minute. The fetch interval could be set for whatever you need to. I'm just going to set it to 1 minute so that we're not waiting 5 minutes on this demo between when we're making updates. I am going to set force redeployment. So always just redeploy, even if the configuration, it already has some of the basically like a clean install. And then the next thing that we're going to select is all edge devices at once. But that's the only other setting that we're going to go ahead and set. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this stack. And you can see it says success. And it says immediately that it is deploying. So it's going to go ahead and try to create, it's reading that configuration file from that Git repo. It's going to go ahead and try to build the Docker containers based off of that configuration file. And then it's going to automate the deployment for us. So you can see it's acknowledged. So basically, the Portainer Edge agents have acknowledged that there is a new configuration file, and they know that they need to, pull down and rebuild whatever the configuration is defined on the Portainer management server. So we're just going to go ahead and refresh this. And you can see now I've 2 of the 2 deployments have been received, which means our Edge environments now have this application stack that I've defined. So I didn't have to remote in and configure the applications on the, the Edge agents. I basically just define the stack, and now it's always going to rebuild the application containers and automatically deploy them to me based off of how I set this up here. So let's go ahead and verify that is the case. So I'm going to actually remote back into Edge Agent 1. And before we run Docker process show, we only saw the Edge agent on there because we didn't have any other services running on there. So now if I run the same command, you can see now I have both InfluxDB and HiByte running on this machine. So again, that container was created and it was automatically deployed for us. So if I go ahead and open up a web browser, we can just verify that this is the case. I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to Intelligence Hub. And there you see, I have Intelligence Hub. I have the, I just use the default, credentials, and Intelligence Hub is up and running on this Edge environment. So pretty cool that creation of the application stack was created and automatically deployed to this environment. Let's go ahead and double check with Edge Agent 2 and make sure that we have the same thing. So again, on this one, I'm just going to do sudo docker process show. And again, all of the applications defined in that configuration file are showing up here. So we have InfluxDB and HiByte. So again, I know that this worked. It deployed to all of my Edge environments all at the same time. So you can imagine, I mean, it's pretty cool for this, but we only have 2 different Edge compute nodes. You can imagine for an enterprise, you might have hundreds. And this tool makes that deployment process and management so much easier, right? This orchestration is exactly what we need when we're talking about enterprise environments. And again, this is really nice for Edge environments because the Edge agents reach up into the high trust instead of most orchestration tools where it's pushing down into the low trust, right? So this is exactly what we need for Edge. So let's go ahead and show the GitOps portion of that, which is really being able to just make a change in our composer file in Git and then re-trigger this entire process again. So let's go back to our Portainer management server. And I don't need to make any changes here in Portainer. Basically, Portainer is all fully set up now. So all I'm going to do is go back to my Git repository. I'm going to go ahead and show file and explore. We're going to open up that file. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add another service in this configuration file or this Docker Compose file. We're then going to save it. We're going to commit our changes to the main branch in the Git repo. And that's automatically going to trigger Portainer to re-trigger the creation and the deployment of our application stack. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have it already kind of ready for us to go here. Essentially, I just need to open up V1. And essentially what we're going to add here is ignition. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste this. I had this all pre-ready to go, so I didn't have to create that from scratch because I'm sure I would have a typo in there. So all we've added here is we're adding ignition. And then again, we're updating the Docker Compose file. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now if I go back to my Git repo, I can see what changes have occurred here. So if, I just made those changes, but if I was an engineer, I would instantly be able to see, oh, this is what changed. Our Docker Compose file changed, and this is what was added, this ignition service, right? So now I can go ahead and, commit this. So I'm just going to say added ignition, just so we have a name. And all I'm going to say is updated Docker Compose file to include ignition, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit commit this to the main. And then again, this is going to re-trigger Portainer to rebuild this and to automatically deploy it. So I'm not going to have to do anything in Portainer. Basically, I'm going to hit commit to main. And then I'm going to put, so when I commit that, I committed it locally. So now I'm going to push this to our repository. And that's the repository that Portainer is listening to. And I'm not sure if I need to refresh this page or if it's going to update on its own. Let's just go ahead and refresh just in case. And we might just have to wait because of that 1 minute timer that we set up when we set up the polling. So again, we just had to wait that 1 minute, but now you can see it's deploying. So it's automatically seen that update based off of the configuration file in our Git repository, and it's rebuilding that, right? So now we're just waiting for it to to build it, and then the edge agents are going to acknowledge that they see that there's a new update, and then it's going to automatically do the deployment for us. So let's just keep refreshing. And it might take it a little bit. Ignition's a pretty big file. I think it's like 2 gigs. So it might just take it a second to do this build. So we'll just kind of give it a few seconds here. Okay, so now I just refreshed it. You can see that the edge agents have received that they have seen a change. So 2 of 2. So all of our agents have, registered that there's a new configuration. One of them has already been deployed. The second one's still in progress. So if I go ahead and refresh, I'm sure it's already been acknowledged. So now, again, both deployments have been sent and the status has been completed. So again, I didn't have to do anything in Portainer. It was already set up. All I had to do was update my configuration in Git, and that triggered the entire creation and deployment of the entire stack. So let's go ahead and again verify inside of our edge compute nodes to make sure that Ignition's running. So again, I'm going to do Docker process show. And just like before, I now have Ignition, running on this virtual machine, and I didn't have to do anything. So let's go ahead and check Edge 2. Same thing, sudo Docker process show. And again, I have Ignition running on this. So hopefully this demo was really helpful for you guys to kind of learn about GitOps and understand how we can use some of these new technologies to address the issues around deploying and managing edge application architectures. If you have any questions in the comments, please let me know. But this is a really cool technology. Portainer is definitely not the only orchestration tool out there. There's definitely a lot of different tools out there that can do kind of similar things to this. I like using Portainer. I use it in my personal workflow because it just makes it really easy to do things like that. But hopefully you guys saw the value in using GitOps and how we can start bringing DevOps into manufacturing in a way that, is a little bit different from IT, but still addresses kind of the same core principles. So hopefully you guys like that. If you did, please let me know in the comments. Or if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to address them. But thank you guys. I'll tell you guys later. See ya.